My dad lit a cigarette and said, "Today, you'll learn what a real woman is." At 15, I was forced to see the world through the cruelest lens. What should have been a coming-of-age lesson nearly destroyed my soul. And to all of you watching, tell me in the comments, which small town are you tuning in from? And what time of day are you watching this? Over morning coffee, after lunch, or curled up with a blanket at night? I read every single comment, and it makes my heart so happy to know where you're from and when you're taking time out of your day to listen to this old lady's story. Come on, share with me. Let's build a little bond of love here. Today I'm sharing a story that's hard to talk about, but it needs to be told. How a place that should have been a safe haven turned into our worst nightmare. When I was 15, my dad decided to give me what he called a real-life education. That education nearly broke me, but miraculously, it ended up giving me strength not just to rebuild my own life, but to help so many others too. I was born in a little light blue wooden house in Missoula, Montana. To a kid, the yard felt endless. My dad, Oliver Wilson, was an accountant downtown. Even on the hottest days, he'd always wear a suit and tie, no exceptions. He was tall with broad shoulders and big hands, and he trimmed his beard meticulously every week. My mom, Dorothy Miller Wilson, was an elementary school teacher who taught just about everything. Her brown hair was always pulled back in a bun, and her smile could light up any room. It was just the three of us. Mom had lost 2 babies before me, and the doctors said she couldn't have any more kids after I was born. So I was the center of everyone's world, especially Mom's. She showered me with kisses and told me stories every night before bed. Our house was on a dirt road, a bit outside downtown, but Mom could walk to her school. There was an orange tree in the yard that grew the sweetest oranges I've ever tasted. A swing dad hung from an oak branch, and in the corner, Mom grew herbs for tea and cooking. I think that's where my love for plants started. When I was about 6, life felt perfect. Every morning, Mom would pack my school bag, braid my hair, kiss my forehead before we left, and we'd walk to school together. She'd drop me off at my classroom, then head to hers. During recess, I'd sometimes spot her on the playground, and she'd always have an apple or a piece of cornbread saved for me. Dad left earlier for work and came home after the sun went down. Back then, he still smiled. I remember him coming home with his coat slung over his shoulder, lifting me up and spinning me around, asking, "How was my little princess's day?" I'd tell him everything, from what I learned in class to the games we played at recess. Montana winters are brutal. The wind cuts right through you, blowing in from the plains and seeping through the window cracks. We'd huddle around the wood-burning stove. Mom would make spiced cider for her and Dad, and hot chocolate for me. Dad would tell stories about his younger days, how he met Mom at a 4th of July dance, how he fell in love with the way she moved when she danced. My favorite game, of course, was school teacher. I'd line up all my dolls and teddy bears and teach them just like Mom did. For Christmas, I got a little blackboard, and I'd draw and write on it for hours. I also loved playing with the neighborhood kids, especially Claire, who lived across the street. We'd climb trees, make pretend meals with leaves and dirt, and dig holes by the fence to hide our secrets. But when I turned 9, everything started to change. Mom got sick. At first, it was just headaches. She'd brush them off with a smile. But soon, she was in bed all day, curtains drawn because the light hurt her eyes. Doctors came and went, their faces always serious, talking quietly with Dad in the living room. That's when I noticed the first change in Dad. His smile faded away. It was like as Mom's joy drained, he lost a part of himself too. He came home later and later, smelling of cigarettes, sometimes alcohol. The nights by the stove, telling stories, those were gone. He rarely asked about my day at school anymore. One winter morning, the yard was covered in frost, like a carpet of crystals. Mom didn't wake up. I remember the house being chaos. Dad's sister, Aunt Judith, took me to her house. Neighbors came and went, talking in hushed voices, their eyes filled with sadness. I remember the dark wooden casket in the living room, white flowers and candles. I didn't understand why Mom looked like she was sleeping, but no one was waking her up. After the funeral, Dad changed completely. The gentle man who used to spin me around was gone, replaced by a silent shadow who sat staring into space at night, a glass and a cigarette in hand. Aunt Judith stayed with us for a few weeks, cooking, cleaning, taking care of me, but she had her own family, and eventually, she had to leave. In the end, it was just me and Dad in that house. Without Mom, it felt huge. The rooms were the same, but empty and cold. The wood stove was rarely lit, and meals were silent affairs. I still went to school, but now I walked alone, my hair ribbons askew, because no one was there to fix them for me. Gradually, I started doing the housework, learning to wash my own clothes, cook rice and beans, sweep the floors. It wasn't by choice, it was necessity. Dad was physically there, but his mind was somewhere else. Sometimes when he looked at me, I felt like he was seeing Mom in my face, and it only made him more miserable. When I was 12, I noticed more changes. Dad started dressing nicer, wearing cologne before he left, sometimes staying out all night. He said he had extra work, but he couldn't look me in the eye when he said it. At school, I heard whispers. Other kids would mutter, "Your dad works at that place now." But they never said what place. I didn't fully understand what was going on, but I knew something was wrong. Bills piled up on the kitchen table. The money that used to cover our expenses always seemed to fall short. I had to quit piano lessons, my only joy back then. And the dad who'd once been so punctual and committed to his word? He didn't seem to care about anything anymore. It was in this loveless, silent environment that I entered adolescence. No mother to guide me, a father growing more distant by the day, and each anniversary of Mom's death weighing heavier on my heart. On a cold afternoon in June 1961, I turned 15. No cake, no candles, no birthday wishes. Dad came home earlier than usual, which was strange in itself. He walked in, took off his coat, and hung it carefully on a chair. I was in the kitchen, trying to make dinner. "Martha," he said, lighting a cigarette with the silver lighter he'd carried as long as I could remember. "Things are going to be different from today on." I looked at him confused. His eyes, once as gentle as Mom's, were now hard as river rocks, with a strange glint, mix of determination and despair. "You're not a child anymore," he said, blowing smoke out his nose. "It's time you learned what the world is really like." He told me I didn't have to go to school anymore, that the things they taught there were useless in real life. I tried to argue, said I loved reading, wanted to be a teacher like Mom. But he slammed his fist on the table, making the dishes jump. "Don't talk back to me," he shouted. It was the first time I'd ever been truly afraid of my own father. "Starting tomorrow, you're coming to work with me. I'll teach you a real trade." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept wondering what kind of work it would be. Dad was an accountant, or so I'd always thought. Maybe he wanted to teach me to keep books, work with numbers. But why make me drop out of school? The next morning, he woke me up before sunrise. "Put this on," he said, tossing a dress onto my bed. It was a simple, cheap fabric dress, but clean and ironed. I'd never seen it before. We left while it was still dark, walking in silence through streets I didn't recognize, farther from downtown Missoula, into a neighborhood I'd never been to. The houses got farther apart, then there were warehouses, and finally, we reached a tall, dark wooden building with a faded sign that read Night Star. "Is this a bar?" I asked hesitantly. Dad didn't answer. He pulled a set of keys from his pocket, unlocked the padlock, and pushed the door open. The first thing that hit me was the smell: cigarettes, spilled liquor, cheap perfume, and something else. Inside, there was a long dark wooden bar, round tables scattered across the floor, and a small stage in the corner with a faded red curtain. The place was empty, silent, but somehow I could almost hear echoes, voices, laughter, music. "This is my business now," Dad said, gesturing to the whole room. I was stunned. All these years, I'd thought he was still an accountant, that his late nights and the smell of were just him trying to forget his pain. But that wasn't the case. "When did this start?" I asked. "After your mom died," he cut me off, walking to the bar and picking up a half-empty bottle. "The accounting firm didn't pay enough. A man's gotta survive, and this place, well, it fell into my lap. A client owed me money, paid me with this." He poured some amber liquid into a glass and drank it down. "At first, I just helped with the books. But then I realized I could do more." Over the next few hours, he told me the Night Star had once been just a roadside bar, but he'd turned it into Missoula's most profitable entertainment spot. He said it gently, but the meaning was clear. It was more than a bar. It was a brothel. "What am I supposed to do here?" I asked, my stomach churning. He pulled a high stool over to the darkest corner of the room, a spot where you could see everything, but barely be seen. "You sit here," he said, his tone serious, almost professorial. "Watch carefully. Learn how the world really works, not that useless stuff they teach you in school. See what men are like when no one's watching. See how women survive in a world that's abandoned them. You'll learn that everything has a price and a value." He lit another cigarette, watching the smoke curl up toward the dirty ceiling. "Churches teach you to pray. I'll teach you to live, to see the truth behind everyone's mask." On that first day, I sat on that stool for hours. Dad explained how the place worked, watering down drinks to make more money, encouraging customers to spend beyond their means, keeping track of debts in a black notebook locked in a drawer. Later that afternoon, the girls, he called them performers, started arriving. About 8 of them, all different ages, but none over 30. Some looked at me curiously, some with sympathy, a couple with eyes that seemed to warn me silently. Mara was the first to talk to me. She was thin with dyed blonde hair, her eyes tired and worn. "You're his daughter?" she asked, lighting a cigarette and adjusting her tight dress. I nodded, and she shook her head. "Poor kid. He shouldn't have brought you here." "This is work." Dad suddenly appeared behind us, cutting her off. "She needs to learn, just like you did once." They exchanged a look, one I couldn't understand then, but I felt the tension. Mara looked away first, muttered something, and walked off. By nightfall, the Night Star came alive. A half-drunk old pianist showed up and started playing old songs. The lights dimmed, casting long shadows in the corners, and the customers began to arrive. I sat on my stool in the dark corner, watching them, all kinds of men. Farmers in boots and hats, office workers in cheap suits, businessmen with gold rings, truck drivers with calloused hands. By day, they were respected citizens of Missoula. But at night, in the Night Star, they became someone else entirely. Dad would pour me a soda, in a heavy glass, making me look like I was drinking alcohol too. "Observe," he kept saying. "Learn." What I saw that first night disturbed me deeply. I watched men who smiled politely by day turn greedy and cruel. I saw the girls forcing smiles, their eyes empty. I saw money changing hands, favors traded, empty promises made. Dad moved through the room like a conductor of some bizarre orchestra. He remembered every customer's name, knew exactly what to say to make them spend more, drink more, stay longer. It was a strange skill I'd never seen in him before. Sometimes he'd bring customers over to my stool. "This is my daughter Martha," he'd say, with a strange pride in his voice. "She's learning the business." The men would look at me curiously, some uncomfortable, others with dark eyes that made me huddle deeper into my seat. Once, a red-faced, middle-aged farmer asked, "What's she learning, Oliver?" Dad laughed a dry laugh. "The most important lesson: everything in life has a price, Hank. Everything." The man stared at me for a long moment before Dad pulled him back into the crowd. By the time the last customer left, the sun was coming up. I'd been sitting on that stool so long my back ached, my eyes stung from the smoke, and my head was spinning with everything I'd seen and heard. Dad called me into the small back office. On a beat-up desk, he emptied the cash register, crumpled bills, coins, a few checks. "Count it," he ordered. My hands trembled as I sorted the money into piles. I'd never seen so much cash in one place. After I counted, he wrote the number in a notebook, then put everything into a safe hidden behind a painting on the wall. "This is a real education," he said, locking the safe. "Not that useless stuff in school. Power, Martha. Freedom. Never having to depend on anyone." On the walk home through Missoula's dark streets, dawn breaking, I was tired, confused, and scared. But I knew my life had changed forever. "We'll be back tomorrow," he said when we got home. It wasn't a question. It was a command. And so my education at the Night Star began. Day after day, night after night, I sat on that stool and watched. That chair in the dark corner became my post to observe the darkest parts of human nature. And the father who'd once lifted me up and called me princess became my guide through this place that pretended to be entertainment. Months turned into years. From 1961 to 1963, the Night Star was my school, my prison, my daily nightmare. Gradually, Dad gave me more responsibilities. No longer just observing and counting money at night. Now I had to keep track in the black notebook. Who drank what, which customers owed money, which performers were the most popular. "Keep your eyes open, your ears sharp, and your mouth shut," he'd repeat like a mantra. He taught me to calculate profits, deduct expenses for alcohol, food, and the meager wages he paid the girls. What I couldn't stand most were the things he said. As we watched the brothel floor, he'd mutter under his breath, "See that county judge? By day he's sentencing people for petty theft. By night he's spending his entire paycheck here while his wife thinks he's working late." Or look, there's Ernest, the town's biggest furniture store owner. Goes to church with his family every Sunday, but every Tuesday he orders Julie and pays extra for things his wife wouldn't dream of. He seemed determined to strip away every illusion I had about the world, to make me believe that decency was just a thin mask that could be easily shattered with a little alcohol and darkness. Slowly, the women at the Night Star started to reach out to me. I think they felt sorry for the girl sitting alone in the corner, her eyes growing darker by the day. Mara, the blonde, would often sit next to me before the place opened in the afternoon, telling me about her childhood in Helena, how she'd once dreamed of being a singer, how she'd ended up here after her husband left her with a young daughter and no way to survive. "Kid, you don't belong here," she'd say, lighting another cigarette. "This isn't no place for a girl your age." Julie, a tall dark-haired girl from Portland, would sometimes sneak me candy. "Eat this, honey. You're too skinny," she'd whisper, glancing over her shoulder to make sure Dad wasn't around. "That man's got no heart, bringing you here." Teresa, the youngest at just 20 with eyes that looked far older, once gave me a tube of lipstick. "Here," she said, giving me a sad smile. "You'll need it someday. Just not now. Not here." Dad didn't like them talking to me, but he tolerated it as long as it didn't interfere with my education. Sometimes I'd catch him watching our interactions with a calculating look, as if he was measuring how much I was connecting with these performers, worried I might develop too much sympathy and ruin the learning. The winter of 1962 was especially harsh. Missoula was freezing, and the night star's wooden walls were thin, offering little protection from the cold. The nights were long, and the bar was more crowded than usual, men seeking warmth in alcohol and paid companionship. One of those men was Herman Reynolds, who owned a textile mill in a nearby town. He was big, with broad shoulders and thick hands, and he had a reputation for being the hardest customer to handle. The women hated being alone with him, but he paid well, so no one could refuse. On an especially busy night, Herman was already drunk when he walked in, demanding immediate attention. Dad greeted him warmly as usual, calling him friend, leading him to the best table, giving him the good stuff, which was the same as everything else, just in a nicer bottle, and pairing him with a companion. But Herman was irritable and rude. "Oliver, I want something different tonight," he slurred, his small eyes scanning the room before landing on me in the corner. "That girl," he said, pointing at me with his glass. "I want to talk to her." My blood ran cold. I'd been at the Night Star for nearly 2 years, sitting on that stool, watching the worst of humanity, but I'd always kept my distance, like watching a horror movie that didn't involve me. But now, that man's gaze pulled me right into it. Dad hesitated for a split second, and in that second, I realized there was a line even he wouldn't cross. "Herman, my friend," he said, forcing an awkward smile. "My daughter's not one of the performers. She's just here learnin' the business. Why don't you pick one of our experienced girls? Veronica just came from Helena. You'll love her. She's beautiful, and she can do things you wouldn't even imagine." The man muttered something, distracted by the new attraction. Dad winked at me, signaling for me to get out of the main room and into the back office. I did, trembling, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would jump out of my throat. In the office, I locked the door and huddled under the desk. I stayed there for hours, listening to the distant music, laughter, and occasional shouts. That night, I cried for the first time. Cried for the girl I'd been, for the normal adolescence I'd been robbed of, for the classes I'd missed, the friends I'd never made, the life that had been taken from me. When Dad finally came to get me, the sun was up again. He looked tense, his tie askew, his coat stained with liquor. "Herman's gone," he said, not looking at me. "Let's go home." We walked in silence for a long time before he suddenly spoke. "That's part of the education too, Martha. Knowin' when to back down, when to push forward. Not every customer's worth the risk." It was the closest thing to protection he'd offered me in years. But the incident with Herman Reynolds changed things at the Night Star. Dad started keeping me more in the background, managing the books, organizing inventory, overseeing purchases. It was like he'd suddenly realized his education might have gone too far. But this change brought new horrors. Now I had access to the ledgers, the records, the darkest secrets of the business. I discovered that many of the performers were trapped in debts they could never repay. Dad had lent them money at exorbitant interest rates, ensuring they'd never be free. I found out he offered protection to local small businesses, charging them steep fees. And I learned that some of the town's richest, most powerful men were in his pocket, their secrets carefully documented in a locked file cabinet. One afternoon, while sorting through receipts, I found a yellowed envelope addressed to Mr. Oliver Wilson, accountant. It was from the law firm Bentley Ferguson in Seattle, dated 1955, the year Mom died. Curiosity got the better of fear, and I opened it carefully. The letter mentioned the transfer of assets according to the will of Mrs. Dorothy Miller Wilson, including several properties and a business establishment called the Night Star. My world crumbled. This brothel wasn't something Dad had stumbled into, as he'd claimed. It had belonged to my mother, the gentle, kind elementary school teacher I'd always thought she was. Or so I'd believed. I quickly put the letter back in the envelope and hid it in the stack of papers, my heart racing. If this letter was true, who was the real Dorothy Miller Wilson? And who was the man I called father? A million questions swirled in my head, but I had no one to ask. No friends, no family besides Dad. The women at the brothel were kind, but they were trapped just like me. Who would believe a 17-year-old girl, the brothel owner's daughter, over a grown man with connections to nearly everyone in power in town? Once, I ran into my old English teacher, Miss Eleanor, at the market. I tried to talk to her. She was kind, asked why I'd dropped out of school, said she'd missed having me in class. I wanted to tell her about the Night Star, about how Dad was forcing me to work there, but the words stuck in my throat. Before I could say anything, Dad appeared as if he had a sixth sense, able to detect any attempt at escape. "Miss Eleanor," he said, flashing a professional smile. "So good to see you. Martha talks about you often. Unfortunately, we have to run errands to take care of, you know." He grabbed my arm so tight it left a bruise, pulling me away. "Never speak to her again," he gritted his teeth. "Never try to tell anyone about our business. No one will believe you, and no one will help you." That night, he drank more than usual in the office. "You think you can run away?" he slurred. "You think you have somewhere to go? The world you're so eager to get back to, it's no different than here. Just more hypocritical. At least here, we're honest about who we are." In that moment, I knew I was completely alone. The only person who could save me was myself. So I started planning my escape in secret. I made a false lining in my wallet and began hiding money. I memorized the bus schedules out of Missoula. I studied Dad's habits, when he drank more, when he slept deeper. Most importantly, I started looking for that locked file cabinet. I knew it held secrets, secrets about the brothel, about how it had really come into Dad's hands, maybe even about Mom's death. Those secrets might be my only ticket to freedom. My isolation was almost complete. Anyone who might help me, like Miss Eleanor, had been chased away by Dad. He controlled every aspect of my life. What I ate, what I wore, who I spoke to. The women at the brothel were my only companions, but they were trapped in their own debts and dependencies. At night, lying in bed staring at the peeling ceiling, I dreamed of escaping. I imagined a life far away, a normal life, with school, friends, maybe a family of my own someday. But every morning, when Dad knocked on my door, telling me to get ready for another day at the Night Star, those dreams felt farther and farther away. The more I learned about how the brothel operated, the deeper I saw the web of corruption, blackmail, and abuse Dad had woven, and the more I realized escaping wouldn't be easy. Someday, I'd whisper to myself every night, like a prayer, "Someday I'll leave here, and I'll never come back." But the Night Star's claws were in deep, and the stench of despair had seeped into my skin, my hair, my soul. On the night of May 12, 1964, the Night Star was like any other. The drunk pianist played the same old songs on repeat. The smell of cigarettes, sweat, and cheap perfume soaked into every board of the floor. The women forced smiles, their eyes empty, repeating the same conversations. I was almost 18, and the weight of those 3 years of education had bent my shoulders, like carrying stones. By then, I no longer sat on the stool in the corner. My place was in the small back office, managing the books, handling paperwork, keeping records. Dad trusted me more now, letting me run the practical side of the business, while he schmoozed with important clients in the main room. My escape plan remained a secret. I had nearly $1,000 hidden in the lining of my wallet. I'd memorized the bus schedule to Seattle, and with Mara's quiet help, I'd secretly made a copy of the office key, the one I suspected Dad kept important documents in. That night started like any other until Joseph Matthews walked into the brothel. He wasn't a regular, in fact, I'd never seen him before. He was short with narrow shoulders, neatly trimmed gray hair, and wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a well-tailored suit and polished shoes, looking completely out of place here. I watched him walk up to the bar and ask for Mr. Oliver Wilson. The bartender pointed to Dad, who was chatting warmly with the mayor in the corner of the main room. The man adjusted his tie, took a deep breath, and walked over to them with purpose. I watched from the office doorway. The man leaned in and said something to Dad, and I saw Dad's expression change, first surprise, then anger, then concern. He apologized to the mayor and led the visitor to a more private corner. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. Dad gestured wildly, his face growing redder by the second, while the man remained calm, shaking his head occasionally. Finally, I saw Dad pull his wallet from his inside pocket and hand the visitor some bills, which the man pocketed without counting. After the man left, Dad stood there, rubbing his face, then walked straight to the bar and poured himself a double whiskey, downing it in one gulp. I hurried back to my desk, pretending to work on the ledgers. A few minutes later, Dad burst into the office like a hurricane, slamming the door shut and starting to rummage through drawers. "What are you looking for?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer, continuing to throw papers everywhere. Finally, he found a small silver key in an envelope and walked to the metal cabinet in the corner of the room. He unlocked it and started searching through the folders inside. "Who was that man?" I asked again. Dad turned around, his eyes bloodshot, veins bulging on his forehead. "A messenger from hell," he replied hoarsely. "From Bentley Ferguson in Seattle." My heart raced. That was the same law firm mentioned in the letter I'd found years earlier. What did he want? Dad pulled a folder from the cabinet and threw it on the desk. "He's here to remind me that you turn 18 in 3 weeks. I fell silent, confused. What did my birthday have to do with a law firm from Seattle? "Your mother," he said, opening the folder and spreading more papers across the desk. "Your dear, saintly mother, she left a will." My blood froze. That confirmed the suspicion I'd had since finding that letter. Mom had left a will, and it clearly had something to do with me, with the night star. "This place," he said, gesturing to the walls around us. "This business, it was hers, not mine." Hers. The elementary school teacher, the loyal wife, the model mother, she was a brothel owner. The revelation, though expected, hit me like a punch to the stomach. My mother, the woman who'd braided my hair every morning and told me stories at night, had owned the Night Star. "An inheritance?" I stammered. He spat the word like it was poison. "From her family. This place existed long before I met your mother, belonged to a grandfather you never knew. By day, he was a respected man. By night, He was an exploiter, just like all the men you've seen here. He pulled a whiskey bottle from the bottom drawer of his desk and took another big drink. When we got married, she kept it a secret. Told me she had some property that generated income. I was just an accountant, lucky to marry such a beautiful, well-off woman. I didn't find out the truth until your grandfather died, and she had to take over the business. He let out a bitter, humorless laugh. I tried to get her to sell it, to get rid of this place. But she was stubborn. Said it was a legitimate business, a way to give women with no other options a chance, like it was some kind of charity. He drank straight from the bottle again. Then she got sick. Those headaches. The doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong. She wasted away, and our money dried up. Medical bills, doctor's visits, everything cost a fortune. Finally, she asked me to take over the Night Star, said it was our only source of income. His voice cracked, and for a moment, I saw the man he'd once been: vulnerable, scared, human. Of course I refused. How could I run a place like this? I was a respected accountant, a family man. But she kept pushing, said it was only temporary, until she got better. I finally agreed. He looked at me, his eyes wet. After she died, I thought I'd be free of this place. Sell it, start over in another city. But then the will surfaced. He pulled a document from the folder and threw it in front of me. Read it. See what your saintly mother has planned for us. I picked up the paper with trembling hands. It was a copy of Dorothy Miller Wilson's will. The words blurred in front of my eyes, but I made out the key points. The Night Star and all of Mom's assets were to be managed by Dad only until I turned 18. After that, everything would transfer to me. She wants you to inherit all this, Dad said, his voice filled with resentment. She didn't trust me to run the family business, thought it would be better in the hands of her dear daughter. He leaned across the desk, his face just inches from mine. That's why I brought you here when you were 15, to learn, to show you what your mother left you, to prepare you to take over your inheritance. All the pieces finally fell into place. Dad's so-called education had never been about teaching me the ways of the world. It had been about grooming me to take over the brothel, to become the next owner of the Night Star. I don't want this, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. I never did. He let out that terrible, empty laugh again. Do you think I wanted it? Martha, I was an accountant, working in a clean office with decent people. Your mother turned me into this. Now that I've finally learned how to play the game, finally started making real money, that damn lawyer shows up to remind me I have to hand everything over to you in 3 weeks. He snatched the document from my hand and crumpled it up. Unless you sign a power of attorney, let me keep running everything in your name. I'll be the real owner, you just the figurehead. In that moment, something inside me snapped. Years of anger, fear, and disgust erupted all at once. Never. I stood up. I'll never sign anything. A slap came out of nowhere. My cheek burned, and my head spun. You will sign, he shouted, grabbing my arm tightly. You will sign, or I swear I'll. He didn't finish, but the threat in his eyes was clear. I hung my head, pretending to submit. I need time to think, I whispered. Please. He let go of me, straightened his jacket, and regained some composure. Then think, he said. Give me your answer before your birthday. But remember, this place, these people, this world, it's in your blood. Just like your mother. Running won't change that. He left the office, leaving me alone with the scattered papers, the crumpled will, and a truth that had shattered everything I'd believed about my life. That night, I couldn't sleep again. Mom's gentle, loving image collided with the reality of her being a brothel owner. The stories she'd told me at bedtime, the lessons she'd taught me, they'd all come from a woman who ran a place like the Night Star. And the father I'd hated for forcing me to live in hell had initially been coerced, changed by this place just as it had tried to change me. I tossed and turned in bed, listening to the sounds of Missoula at night. Somehow I knew that night was a point of no return. In 3 weeks, I'd be 18. I had to make a choice: sign the power of attorney and let Dad keep control, take over the brothel myself, or find a third way. The next morning, I woke up with a determination I'd never felt before. I dressed carefully, putting on a simple but neat dress Mara had given me for Christmas the year before. I brushed my hair and looked at myself in the mirror. I was no longer the scared 15-year-old girl who'd been dragged to the Night Star. I was almost a woman now, my eyes worn by experience, but still holding a glimmer of hope. I arrived at the brothel earlier than usual. Dad was already in the office, wearing the same clothes as the night before, his face lined with exhaustion and alcohol, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. "You didn't have to come in today," he said, not looking up from the papers he was sorting. "I need to," I replied. "We have things to talk about." He looked up at me, surprised by my firmness. "I want to see all the documents," I continued. "The original will, the property records, the deeds, everything." He frowned. "Why? If I'm going to make a decision in 3 weeks, I need to know exactly what's at stake." A flicker of hope crossed his face. He thought I was considering the power of attorney, that I was starting to accept this family business. He had no idea I was planning something far more drastic. "The documents are in a safety deposit box at the bank," he said. "I can arrange for us to go tomorrow." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "I also want to learn more about Mom, how she ran this place." That seemed to disarm him completely. For a moment, the cold, calculating man was replaced by a widower still grieving his loss. "Your mother, she was different from me," he said softly. "She kept her distance. Hired a manager, rarely came here herself. She used the money to help people. Set up a fund for girls who wanted to leave, to start over somewhere else. Paid for their schooling, helped them open small businesses." The revelation was like a ray of light in the darkness. My mother hadn't just been a brothel owner. She'd tried to turn this dark place into a way to help women escape lives like this. "And you ended all that," I said calmly, stating a fact rather than accusing. He looked away. "The fund ran out after she got sick. Later, I needed the money to survive, to take care of you." But we both knew that was a lie. The money had gone to fund his vices, to buy influence, to build his small kingdom of power and corruption. "I'll see you tomorrow," I said, standing up. "We'll go see the documents." I walked out of the office with my head held high, a plan forming in my mind. I no longer needed to run away like a thief in the night. In 3 weeks, all of this would be legally mine. And when that day came, I could do whatever I wanted with the Night Star, sell it, transform it like Mom had apparently tried to do, or a third option was slowly taking shape. An option so radical, so complete, it scared me. But it also gave me a strange sense of peace. That night, I dreamed of Mom. She was sitting on the edge of my bed, braiding my hair just like she used to. "Be strong, my daughter," she said in the dream. "Do what's right." I woke up as the first light of dawn broke, knowing exactly what I had to do. The next 3 weeks were a strange, tense calm. Dad and I circled each other cautiously, watching each other's moves, choosing our words carefully, each plotting our own course. As he'd promised, he took me to the bank the next day. In a small private room reserved for important clients, I saw the original documents, the will, the Night Star's title deeds, the property records. Everything confirmed what I already knew. On June 10, 1964, my 18th birthday, I would become the legal owner of everything. Have you thought about my offer? Dad asked as we left the bank. I kept my expression calm. I'm still considering it. He seemed to believe I was leaning toward signing the power of attorney, that I was starting to accept this family business. As the days passed, he grew kinder, even gentle. He began teaching me details of the business he'd never shared before. How to negotiate with suppliers, how to handle greedy inspectors, how to keep important clients happy without compromising too much. Someday, all this will be yours, he'd say, gesturing around the office. Even if I keep managing it, you should understand how it works. I nodded, asked questions, pretended to be interested. But at night, alone in my room, I refined my plan. I didn't tell anyone about the will or my upcoming birthday, not even the women who'd become my only friends. But I started looking at them differently, wondering what Mom would have done for them, what kind of opportunities she would have created. Mara had a 12-year-old daughter living with her grandmother in Helena, and she dreamed of saving enough money to open a small restaurant and raise her daughter with dignity. Julie wanted to go back to Portland, where she had relatives, but she was trapped by debts she could never repay. Teresa, the youngest, had a talent for sewing. She spent her free time mending clothes for the other girls and dreamed of becoming a dressmaker. All of them were chained to the Night Star, not by choice, but by necessity, by lack of options, by the debts Dad had invented to keep them dependent. About a week before my birthday, after the brothel closed for the night, I met with Mara, Julie, and Teresa in a small park near the church. It was risky, but necessary. Something's going to happen tomorrow, I said quietly. Something that will change everything. I can't tell you what, but I need you to trust me. They exchanged confused looks. When it's over, I continued, you'll be free. No more debts. No more Night Star. What are you talking about, kid? Mara asked, narrowing her eyes in suspicion. I pulled 3 envelopes from my wallet, each containing enough money for a bus ticket and a few weeks of basic expenses. This is for you. To start over. Where did you get this money? Teresa asked, her eyes widening as she looked at the bills. From where it should have gone a long time ago, I replied. I only ask one thing in return. Don't come to work tomorrow night. Stay away from the Night Star. Be ready to leave. They looked at me like I was crazy. Maybe I was. But it was a sane, calculated, necessary kind of crazy. Trust me, I repeated. Please. After a moment's hesitation, each of them took an envelope. Mara squeezed my hand. Be careful, Martha, she said. Her eyes filled with understanding beyond words. Whatever you're planning. On the morning of June 10th, 1964, my birthday, I woke up before sunrise. I lay in bed for a moment, looking at the familiar ceiling of my room, knowing it would be the last time I'd see it. I dressed carefully, choosing practical, comfortable clothes suitable for traveling. I packed my essentials into the small suitcase, a few outfits, a photo of Mom, the tube of lipstick Teresa had given me years earlier, and the documents proving my identity and ownership of the Night Star. When I left my room, Dad was already awake. He was making coffee in the kitchen, something he hadn't done in years. There was even a small cake on the table with a single candle. Happy birthday, he said, forcing a smile. 18, a woman now. I thanked him, my throat tight. Despite everything he'd done to hurt me, he was still my father, the man who'd lifted me up and called me princess before Mom died. We drank our coffee in silence, the cake sitting untouched between us. You signed the bank papers yesterday, he finally said. You're officially the owner of the Night Star now. I nodded, saying nothing. And the power of attorney? He asked, trying to sound casual, but there was anxiety in his voice. Have you decided? I looked at him for a long time, taking in the gaunt, prematurely aged man he'd become, his eyes filled with pain and the damage he'd caused. We'll talk about it tonight, I finally answered. At the Night Star. I want to celebrate my birthday there. After all, it's mine now, isn't it? Something flickered in his eyes, maybe suspicion, but it quickly faded, replaced by the calculating look I knew so well. Of course, he said, standing up to wash his cup. It'll be a special night. I spent the day wandering around town, saying goodbye to Missoula in silence. I visited the old school I'd attended before I was 15. I walked past Miss Eleanor's house, but didn't have the courage to knock. I sat in the town square for a while, watching kids play, watching people rush about their daily lives, the normal life I'd been denied. Around 5 p.m., I picked up the small suitcase I'd hidden in the bushes in our yard and stored it in a locker at the bus station. The bus to Seattle left at 10 p.m., and I planned to be on it. When I arrived at the Night Star, the sun was setting, painting the sky a deep red, as if a warning. Dad was already there, checking the bar inventory and giving instructions to the bartender. He smiled when he saw me. The birthday girl. I smiled back, trying to look natural. Have the girls arrived yet? I asked, already knowing the answer. He frowned. Strange, not yet. Mara's usually the first one here. She must be running late. I nodded, relieved they'd heeded my warning. I walked through the empty main room, running my hand along the tables, the chairs, the silent piano, memorizing every detail, preparing for what was to come. Should we open late today? I asked casually. I was thinking 8 o'clock, he replied. Give the girls a little more time to get here, get ready. It's a special night, after all. Yes, I agreed. Very special. I went to the office and closed the door. From my wallet, I took out the documents I'd prepared over the past week, official papers releasing all the girls from their debts, records of small payments I'd made to each of them, enough to help them start over elsewhere. I signed them with my full name, my signature now legally binding as an adult and the owner of all the assets. I placed each document in an envelope labeled with a woman's name, then put all the envelopes in a folder and hid it in a secret compartment in the desk, a spot I'd discovered years earlier, one Dad didn't know about. When I left the office, it was after 7 p.m. The main room was still empty, no sign of the girls. Dad was pacing, clearly annoyed. Where the hell are these women? He muttered. They've never been late all at once. Maybe they're not coming, I suggested casually. He looked at me suspiciously. What do you know? I shrugged. Nothing. Just a feeling. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. You talked to them, didn't you? What are you planning, Martha? I kept my expression calm. Why don't we open up? The customers will be here soon. I'll work the register tonight. After all, I'm the boss now, aren't I? He hesitated, clearly torn between suspicion and maintaining appearances. He needed to keep up the act until I signed the power of attorney. Fine, he finally agreed. I'll tell the bartender to unlock the doors. He opened the bar, turned on the lights, and put a record on the turntable. I methodically checked all the rooms and exits of the brothel. The pianist arrived, as drunk as usual, and started playing the familiar tunes. At 8 o'clock sharp, the first customers began to arrive. All kinds of men, all surprised to find no girls waiting for them. Where are the girls? One man asked, clapping Dad on the shoulder. They'll be here soon, real soon, Dad replied, forcing a smile, his eyes scanning the room for me. By 9 o'clock, the Night Star was nearly full, but still not a single woman had shown up. The customers were growing impatient, drinking more, talking louder. Dad moved among them, trying to calm them down, promising that attractions would arrive soon. At 10 o'clock, I went to the bar and poured myself a Coke, the first time I'd helped myself without asking permission. A small act of independence, but it symbolized so much. "We need to talk." Dad suddenly appeared beside me. "Now." I nodded and followed him to the office. As soon as he closed the door, he exploded. "What did you do?" he shouted. "Where are the girls? The customers are furious." "They're not coming," I replied calmly. "They're free now." "Free? What the hell are you talking about?" "No one's free. They have debts, contracts, obligations." "Not anymore," I said firmly. "I've canceled their debts. And I've freed myself too." His face turned bright red with anger. "You think you can just end everything I've built? You think you can get away with this?" "You didn't build this," I interrupted. "It was Mom's. Before her, it was my grandfather's. You just twisted it, corrupted what belonged to them." He stepped forward, raising his hand as if to hit me again, but my gaze stopped him. "I'm the owner now," I said in a calm voice I barely recognized as my own. "And I've decided, the Night Star is closing forever tonight." For a moment, he looked confused, as if he didn't recognize the woman standing in front of him. Then his face twisted into a mix of anger and despair. "You don't understand," he said, his voice almost a plea. "This place is everything we have. It's our security, our livelihood. What will we do without it?" "We'll be free," I said simply. He let out that bitter, humorless laugh I hated so much. "Free to do what? Starve? Beg on the streets? The world out there isn't like your school books, Martha. It's cruel. It doesn't care about you." "I know exactly what the world is like," I shot back. "You taught me that, remember? But I also know there's more to life than this place, than the life you chose." He walked away, rubbing his tired face. "So what are you going to do? Sell it? Turn it into something else? A restaurant? A nice little hotel?" His voice dripped with sarcasm. "No," I replied. "I'm going to end it, once and for all." I pulled the office keys from my wallet, the original set, not the copy I'd made years earlier. "The customers are waiting," I said, walking toward the door. "Go take care of them. It's your last night as the owner of the Night Star. Enjoy it." Before he could respond, I walked out of the office and locked the door behind me. I heard his muffled shouts, heard him pounding on the door, but I kept walking, determined. In the main room, the customers were growing agitated, drunk and frustrated at the lack of women. Some threatened to leave, others demanded answers. I climbed onto the small stage where music was occasionally performed and tapped a glass with a spoon to get everyone's attention. Gradually, the noise died down, and all eyes turned to me. "Gentlemen," I began, my voice clear and steady. "Thank you for coming tonight. Unfortunately, I have an announcement to make. The Night Star is closing its doors permanently." After a moment of shocked silence, chaos erupted. "You can't do that. Where's Oliver? What kind of joke is this?" I held up my hand, asking for quiet. "This is no joke. Some of you may know that today is my 18th birthday. According to the will of my mother, Dorothy Miller Wilson, I am now the legal owner of this establishment. And my first and last act as owner is to close it forever." The men in front of me looked shocked, confused, and angry. Some of the older ones exchanged worried glances. Their names and secrets were in Dad's black notebook. "I invite you to finish your drinks and leave in an orderly manner," I continued. "The Night Star will never open again." I stepped down from the stage amid the commotion. Some customers were already leaving, muttering angrily. Others protested more loudly, demanding to see my father. "Mr. Wilson is unavailable at the moment," I told one man. "He'll be out to speak with you shortly." I walked over to the bar where barrels of whiskey and rum were lined up. I deliberately turned on each tap. The liquid began to flow, pooling on the worn wooden floor. "What are you doing?" the bartender shouted, trying to turn the taps off. "Step aside, Silvio," I said. "There's an envelope with your pay in the cash register. Take it and leave. You don't have any business here anymore." He looked at the envelope, then at me, then at the spreading pools of liquor. He decided not to argue. He grabbed the money and headed for the door. The last of the customers were leaving now, some shooting me angry glares, others looking confused. The pianist watched the scene, shaking his head, then stumbled to his feet. "What about me, miss? Should I leave too?" I handed him an envelope. "Yes, Mr. Anello. Your music won't be needed here anymore." Once everyone was gone, I locked the front door from the outside. I could still hear Dad shouting from the office, but his voice sounded distant, unreal, as if from another world. I walked slowly around the brothel. The night was clear, the stars bright, with that crisp June chill unique to Missoula. I pulled the pack of long matches and the cigarette I'd bought earlier from my wallet. I'd never smoked in my life. With surprisingly steady hands, I lit the cigarette. It tasted bitter, the smoke burning my throat, but I didn't care. It was symbolic. I walked back to the front of the Night Star and took one last look at the faded sign. So many tears had been shed here, so many broken lives, so many lost dreams. I took one final drag on the cigarette and threw it on the ground right into the pool of liquor seeping out from under the door. Flames erupted immediately, greedily licking at the dry wooden facade. I stepped back, watching as the fire spread rapidly. For a moment, I thought about Dad, locked in the office. But I knew there was a back exit, one he used regularly to avoid creditors or angry husbands, and the office windows were large enough for a man to climb through. The fire lit up the night sky, attracting the attention of nearby residents. I heard shouts in the distance, people calling for water, for help. It was time to go. I walked quickly away from the fire toward the bus station, never looking back. Even from blocks away, I could feel the heat of the flames, hear the crackle of burning wood and the shatter of glass. When I reached the bus station, there were only 15 minutes left before the bus departed. I retrieved my suitcase from the locker and bought a ticket with the money I'd saved. Seattle would be just the beginning. From there, I'd go wherever life took me. Sitting on the bus, as it pulled away from Missoula, I could see the glow of the fire in the night sky. The Night Star was burning, along with the debt ledgers, the records of dirty secrets, and the stench of despair that had clung to my clothes, my hair, my soul for years. As the bus traveled down the dark road, I felt a long-forgotten emotion, hope. A sense that maybe I could rebuild my life, that I could be more than Oliver Wilson's daughter, more than a victim of the Night Star. That night, as the purifying flames consumed my past, I, Martha Wilson, finally began to live. By the time the bus arrived in Seattle the next morning, I was a different person, not just legally an adult, but transformed by the fire I'd left behind. The literal fire that had burned down the Night Star, and the inner fire that had forged my resolve. The West Coast city greeted me with its own brand of chaos, so different from the quiet of Missoula. Wide streets, tall buildings, constant movement of people and cars. It was overwhelming for a girl from the interior, but I was determined not to let it intimidate me. With the money I'd saved, years of secret hoarding plus what I'd taken from the safe that last night, I rented a simple room at a boarding house for young women near Capitol Hill. It was plain but clean, run by a sharp-eyed older woman named Mrs. Sullivan, who expected proper behavior and mutual respect from her tenants. "Where are you from, dear?" she asked as she showed me the small second-floor room. Missoula, I replied. I'm here to find work and continue my education. She looked me up and down, assessing. Alone? No family. I hesitated. My parents are both deceased, I finally said, simpler, and in a way, not a lie. I have no other relatives in Missoula. Something in my eyes must have touched the old woman, because her stern expression softened slightly. Well, everyone's lonely here in one way or another, she said. But we form a kind of family, look out for each other. As long as you follow the house rules, no male visitors, in by 10 p.m., help with chores, you'll be welcome. I thanked her and began unpacking my small suitcase, putting my few clothes into the worn wooden dresser drawers. After Mrs. Sullivan left, I sat on the narrow bed and took a deep breath, something I hadn't done in years without feeling a weight on my chest. I was free of Missoula, free of the night star, free of Dad. A sense of lightness washed over me, but it was quickly followed by the heavy weight of uncertainty. What do I do now? How do I survive? What direction do I give my life? In the days that followed, I bought newspapers and studied the classified ads carefully. With only an 8th grade education, having dropped out at 15, my options were limited. But I had other skills. I could calculate accurately, write neatly, organize records, and most importantly, I'd learned to read people, to understand their motivations, their desires, their fears. A week after arriving in Seattle, I found a job as a clerk at a small downtown bookstore. The owner, Mr. Emmanuel, was a kind, educated man who valued a love of books more than formal credentials. When I explained that my education had been interrupted but that I was eager to learn more, he looked at me over his glasses and said, "The best university is all around you, thousands of books, thousands of wise minds, waiting to speak to you between the pages." At Athena Books, I began my real education. Between helping customers and shelving books, I read voraciously novels, biographies, essays, poetry. I discovered a world I'd never imagined, meeting all kinds of people through the pages, people who'd suffered, struggled, and triumphed, just as I was trying to do. But the shadows remained. At night, in the silence of my small room at the boarding house, I'd sometimes wake up sweating, the smell of the night star seemingly back in my nostrils, Dad's shouts echoing in my ears. In my nightmares, the fire I'd set didn't just burn down the brothel, it spread, consuming all of Missoula, all of my childhood, everything I'd ever been. Weeks after arriving in Seattle, I saw a small article in the local newspaper. Missoula night spot destroyed by fire, owner missing. The article briefly mentioned that the Night Star had been completely gutted by fire, that the cause was under investigation, and that the owner, Oliver Wilson, was missing and authorities were still searching for him. My chest tightened, not with regret, for I knew I'd done what was necessary, but with deep sadness. Sadness for the man my father had become, for everything we'd lost, for the possibilities that had never been realized. I'd never know for sure what happened to him that night in June 1964. I preferred to believe he'd escaped, as I'd expected, through the back door or the office window, using the chaos to disappear and start a new life somewhere else, just as I was trying to do. Months turned into a year, then 2, in Seattle. The clerk at Athena Books became the assistant manager. Gradually, I earned Mr. Emmanuel's trust, and he began teaching me the business. How to order books, negotiate with publishers, organize literary events. It was at one of those events, a book signing with a local author, that I met Professor Albert Rodriguez from the University of Washington's Psychology Department. "You have a real gift with people," he commented after watching me mediate a heated argument between two customers about the merits of different literary genres. You know how to listen, how to comfort, how to find common ground. I thanked him, flattered by the compliment. Have you ever thought about studying psychology? He asked. I laughed, surprised by the suggestion. Professor, I didn't even finish elementary school. College feels like a distant dream. He looked at me seriously. There's always a way. You could get your GED first, then take the college entrance exams. If you're interested, I'd be happy to mentor you. That chance conversation planted a seed in my heart. In the months that followed, alongside working at the bookstore, I enrolled in night classes to complete my formal education. It was hard studying after a full day's work, absorbing years of knowledge that my classmates had learned gradually. But I had a hunger inside me, a hunger to understand, to grow, to turn the pain of my past into something meaningful. In 1968, at 22 years old, I took the entrance exam for the University of Washington. To my surprise, I was accepted into the psychology program. Professor Albert, who'd become a mentor and friend, was the first to congratulate me. You have an innate understanding of human nature, he said. Now you'll gain the tools to turn that understanding into concrete support for those who need it most. College was intense, challenging, but deeply rewarding. The concepts and theories I learned seemed to give names and structure to things I'd already intuited through my own experiences: resilience, defense mechanisms, trauma, and its aftermath. It all resonated deeply with me. During my senior year, in a supervised clinical internship, I worked with a young woman who'd been abused by her stepfather. As she told her story, betrayal, fear, guilt, repressed anger, I heard echoes of my own past. Not the same kind of abuse, but the same sense of powerlessness, of being trapped in a situation beyond my control. In that moment, I realized that my own story, as painful as it was, had given me a unique ability to empathize. I didn't need to share the details of my past, in fact, I rarely did, but that deep understanding of human suffering was always there, shaping my approach to therapy, my interactions with others, and my ability to truly be present for those seeking help. After graduating, I worked for several years at a community clinic in Seattle, focusing on serving vulnerable women and children. The work was difficult, often discouraging, but incredibly meaningful. It was during this time that I began to hear from some of the women from the Night Star. Mara had used the money I'd given her to move to Helena, reunite with her daughter, and open the small restaurant she'd always dreamed of. She sent me a letter addressed to Athena Books, the only address she knew, thanking me for setting her free and telling me about her new life. Teresa, the youngest, had gone to Portland, gotten a job at a clothing store, and continued to study sewing in her free time. She also wrote, her letters filled with the enthusiasm of a young woman planning her future. I never heard directly from Julie, but Mara mentioned in one of her letters that she'd returned to Portland to be with her family. I hoped she'd found peace and started a new life. As for my father, the mystery remained. In the first few years after the fire, I'd occasionally look for news of him in Missoula newspapers or ask quietly about him when I met someone from that city. But I never found any concrete information. Oliver Wilson had disappeared, seemingly consumed by the same fire that had set me and the other women free. In 1975, at 29 years old, I received an offer to work at a clinic in Oceanside, California. The move felt right. I'd been in Seattle for more than a decade, and while I loved the city that had embraced me, I felt ready for a new chapter. It was in Oceanside that I met Charles, a history professor at California State University. He was a widower with a young daughter, Laura. We met at a seminar on childhood trauma. He was seeking guidance to help his daughter cope with the loss of her mother. Our relationship started professionally, then turned into friendship, and gradually, something deeper. Charles was kind, intelligent, and patient. And Laura was a sweet, resilient little girl who stole my heart immediately. A year later, when Charles asked me to marry him, my heart was filled with joy and fear, joy at the chance to have a family, to experience true love, and fear of the secrets I carried, of the past I'd never fully shared with anyone. "There's something I need to tell you," I said to him one night after Laura had fallen asleep. "About my past, about who I am." He took my hand and looked into my eyes. "Martha, I love you for who you are now. Your past has shaped you into the amazing woman you are, but it doesn't define you." Even so, I told him not everything, some details I'd never be able to put into words, but enough, about my father, about the night star, about how I'd escaped, about the fire. When I finished, his eyes were filled with tears, but more than that, deep understanding. "You survived," he said simply. "Not just survived, but turned your pain into the ability to help others. And for that, I could never love you more." In 1977, we were married in a small ceremony with just a few close friends. Laura, who was 9 at the time, was our bridesmaid, wearing a light blue dress that sparkled. Our life in Oceanside was quiet and loving, filled with the small, everyday joys I'd never imagined possible. Charles and Laura brought lightness to my life, balancing the weight of the memories I still carried. In 1984, Charles was offered a position in Encinitas, a coastal town in Southern California. The local community college needed a history professor, and the town was developing a community mental health program where my experience would be a perfect fit. "It's a small town," Charles warned me. "Nothing like San Diego. Are you sure you want to go?" The peacefulness of Encinitas, its coastal location, and its laid-back pace appealed to me. After so many years in big cities, I was ready for the calm of a smaller, more close-knit community. So at 38 years old, my family and I moved to Encinitas. We rented a house, then bought it, a small place just a few blocks from the beach. From the porch, we could see the ocean and hear the waves at night. Laura, who was a teenager by then, adjusted quickly to small-town life, making friends at the local high school and getting involved in community activities. Charles loved teaching history to students who were often the first in their families to attend college. And I found my true calling in community mental health work. I started support groups for survivors of domestic violence, child abuse prevention programs, self-esteem workshops for teenagers. I used everything I'd learned, not just the knowledge from college, but the hard-won wisdom from my own life, to create safe spaces for healing and growth. Over the years, the memories of the night star and my father never fully disappeared, but they lost their power over me. The nightmares became less frequent. The smell of cigarettes and despair was gradually replaced by the scent of sea air, fresh coffee I drank with Charles in the mornings, and orange cake we had with Laura, and later, our grandchildren, on Sunday afternoons. In 2005, at 59 years old, I officially retired from clinical work, but I continued to volunteer at the community center. Laura was now an adult, a mother of 2, and a teacher just like her father. Charles and I started spending more time traveling on short trips around the country, reading, and walking on the beach on sunny mornings. It was during one of those walks in 2008 that Charles suffered a sudden, severe heart attack. Despite the doctor's best efforts, he passed away. His loss left a huge void, but it didn't break me. The years we'd spent together had taught me that love is stronger than loss, that even after the deepest pain, life goes on. Laura and my grandchildren Emma and Michael became my greatest source of strength. I stayed active in the community, determined to live each day to the fullest as a tribute to Charles and to cherish the second chance at life I'd been given. When the pandemic hit the United States in 2020, I had to adapt once again. In-person activities at the community center were suspended, and Laura and the grandchildren insisted I stay home for safety. It was my granddaughter Emma, 24 at the time, a communications student, who came up with a solution. "Grandma, why don't you share your stories online?" she suggested. "You've been through so much, and you have so much wisdom to share." At first, I thought the idea was ridiculous, me, an almost 80-year-old woman, making videos for the internet. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I didn't have to share everything, some parts of the story were still too painful to put into words. But I could pass on the lessons I'd learned, the hope, the possibility of starting over even after the darkest experiences. Now, at 79 years old, I look out at the ocean in Encinitas and marvel at how unpredictable life is, how strong we can be when we have no other choice, how much we can grow from pain when we find the right path. I still don't know what happened to my father that night in June 1964. Sometimes I imagine he escaped, found some form of redemption in his later years. Other times, I fear he perished in the fire, another victim of the cycle of destruction he'd helped perpetuate. If this video touched your heart, please like it, share it with someone who needs to hear these words, and tell me in the comments, what's your greatest victory over adversity? What part of your past did you have to burn down to move forward? I'll be waiting for you in my next video, right here on my porch in Encinitas. Until then, my dear friends, always have courage.